All right, so diving in, you are awesome learner. You send us down this rabbit hole. And honestly, I'm kind of excited about this one. A deep dive into The Stranger. And not just the story itself, which, okay, yeah, pretty gripping, but we're going deeper. We've got this critical analysis you sent over, and it's like packed with insights. We're talking historical context,
Yeah.
Camus's own life, the whole literary scene, and even, the big philosophical questions swirling around back then.
It's really layered. I mean, to truly get The Stranger, you got to go way beyond Meursault and that, well, let's face it, pretty shocking crime.
Exactly.
Right.
And this analysis, it doesn't mess around. It starts right off the bat
Huh.
with Camus' biography, like hint, hint, this stuff matters.
Oh, it definitely matters. Like, think about it. Camus is born, what, just before World War I kicks off.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, imagine, like, his earliest memories are overshadowed by this global conflict, and then, boom, his dad's killed in the fighting.
Oh, that's right.
It's heavy stuff. And the analysis even mentions, like, his mom kept the piece of the shell that killed him and his dad's medals. It's like this constant reminder of loss and, the just sheer randomness of it all.
That's got to shape your worldview. Big time.
Totally. And then you've got this, like, intense connection he had with his mom, working class, living in Algiers, in Belcourt specifically.
Yeah, the analysis really gets into that. She was like super reserved, not much formal education, worked her tail off.
Right. And Camus, he talked about her admirable silence, saw it almost as, like, strength, a kind of stoicism.
And indifference.
Yeah, indifference too, for sure. And that becomes like a huge theme in his writing.
But it's not straightforward, right?
Mm.
Because the analysis also kind of portrays this silence as like animal, almost cold. It even throws in this, kind of disturbing story about a mother cat eating her kitten.
Yeah, I remember that. It definitely makes you think.
It makes the picture of his mom like really complex. And then to add another layer, there's that story about her being assaulted and Camus as a kid finding comfort sleeping next to her afterward.
It's like hinting at all these unspoken things between them.
Exactly. And the analysis dips into a bit of psychoanalytic interpretation here, suggesting there's maybe this underlying tension, affection mixed with resentment towards her, her reserve.
Yeah, and that tension could definitely fuel the themes you see in The Stranger and even like later in The Plague.
Totally. Okay, so bringing in his working class background, the analysis argues that growing up in Belcourt, it gave Camus this like caustic view of the universe.
Right. He saw work as like just plain hard labor and ideals, well, often just hypocrisy.
And that, the analysis suggests, is where the edge in The Stranger comes from, like stripping away any illusion of legitimacy from, the legal system of the French state.
Absolutely. It challenges the whole system.
But, okay, it wasn't all doom and gloom in Belcourt, right?
Mm.
I mean, Camus also talked about the sense of community, the camaraderie, something he apparently missed when he moved to Paris.
Oh, yeah. He was definitely drawn to that street life, the energy of it, the young guys, confident, the women, very comfortable with their sensuality.
And you could totally see echoes of that in Marie, right?
Oh, absolutely. The analysis makes that connection directly. Marie, with her kind of easygoing sensuality, it fits right in with that whole vibe Camus described. And don't forget, there's this lived moral code he observed in Belcourt, too, like real everyday values.
Honesty, loyalty.
Right, and pride, like not just abstract ideas, but part of how people actually lived. And you see that in Marie, too.
Okay, so we've got all these threads, right? His early life, loss, his mom, the Belcourt atmosphere, all of it kind of feeding into the things we'll see in The Stranger. Now let's shift gears a bit. What about his early days in theater? Because the analysis gets into that too, right?
Oh, yeah, this is interesting. So starting in 1936, he's running his own theater group. And he's not afraid to shake things up. Like, he wants to, like, jolt the audience, get them thinking, not just passively watching.
And me get an experience.
Exactly. And the analysis gives some cool examples. Like, in his adaptation of Malraux's The Time of Scorn, the audience, they're supposed to feel like they're part of a trial. They even sing the Internationale together.
Oh, talk about breaking the fourth wall.
Right. And then there's a Sturmium revolt where they're encouraged to imagine themselves as part of this crowd during a miners' uprising.
Pretty radical stuff for the time.
Totally. But then he also went in the complete opposite direction sometimes. Like with Prometheus in chains, the actors wore masks, no personal identification, and a loudspeaker amplified the philosophical ideas. It was all about creating distance.
Interesting.
The analysis even makes a connection to Bertolt Brecht's alienation effect, preventing the audience from getting too emotionally involved, pushing them towards more intellectual engagement.
Which is kind of what The Stranger does, right? keeps us at a distance from Meursault.
Yeah, there's definitely a parallel there. But I mean, the analysis does point out that Camus generally, he preferred more audience involvement, not just this detached observation.
Got it. So like two sides of the coin.
Yeah, exactly. And what's cool is that Jean Grenier, who actually saw these productions, he picked up on a similar sense of distance in The Stranger itself.
It's like these theater experiments were like a training ground for some of the techniques he used in the novel.
Totally. And the analysis also ties in the myth of Sisyphus, that whole chapter about acting where Camus talks about the actor being aware of playing a role. And they link that to his play Caligula.
Okay, so we've got biography, we've got artistic experiments. Now let's zoom out to the bigger picture because this is where it gets really interesting. The analysis really emphasizes that to understand The Stranger, you got to understand the whole context it came out of.
Right. We're talking the French literary scene, the political climate, and then, of course, the reality of Algeria under French rule.
Totally different worlds.
Exactly. So in France, you've got like the Nouvelle Revue Française, huge names like Proust, Gide. They're all about exploring this inner life.
Yeah, Gide with his ideas about self-liberation and Proust with his whole thing about involuntary memory, how it unlocks like a deeper truth about yourself.
Right. And Camus, he's both drawn to these ideas and kind of pushing against them. Like he admired André Malraux, shared his concerns about courage, lucidity, but he was also critical of that like mystique of revolution that you find in Malraux's work.
Okay, so taking what works, leaving what doesn't.
Exactly. And then you've got Céline, who, like Camus, was super critical of traditional literary language, but they ended up with like totally different writing styles.
So a shared concern, different solutions.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the whole messy situation in Algeria. You've got this growing Arab resistance. Islam's becoming a major unifying force. And officially, it's like, oh, yeah, Arabs can become French citizens, totally equal, but
Not real.
not really at all. It's like this totally flawed system. The analysis calls it the absurdity of assimilation. And it's against this backdrop that The Stranger emerges. And it's also, we have to remember, a piece of Pied Noir writing.
Okay, back up. Pied Noir writing. What's that?
So Pied Noir literally means Blackfoot, and it refers to French people born in Algeria. And their literature, it often reflects this specific perspective, their identity, their relationship to Algeria.
Got it. So Camus being a Pied Noir himself, that's got to inform how he writes The Stranger.
Absolutely. Like the analysis talks about these common Pied Noir self-images, the whole frontier people thing, seen as virile, sensual, prone to both like laziness and these sudden bursts of energy.
Okay, I'm seeing the connection to Meursault now.
Right. That lack of introspection, the focus on the senses, that kind of deep indifference. And the analysis even directly connects this to Camus' essay Nuptials, which, it's all about celebrating the beauty and sensuality of Algeria.
Interesting. And what about like the murder itself? How does that fit into this colonial context?
So some French-Algerian narratives, they might emphasize this, like brotherhood between Pied Noirs and Arabs. Like they're both tough guys living on this frontier. But Camus, he kind of flips that. He shows how violence can erupt even within this supposed kinship.
So it's not this simple us versus them narrative.
Nope. Meursault and the Arab, they become both rivals and, in a weird way, brothers. It's complex, and it actually echoes this figure of the indifferent Arab that Camus wrote about in his essay Betwixt and Between, which, the analysis points out, is also linked to his mom and Meursault's own detachment.
Wow. Okay, lots of layers here. So we talked about Camus' life, the Algerian context, the literary scene. Let's fast forward a bit. World War II breaks out. What happens with The Stranger?
So Camus, he moves to Paris right before the occupation. He's working at a newspaper, Paris Soir, and he's got the manuscript with him.
He brought it with him.
Yeah. And what's amazing is even with all this going on, he's crazy productive. Alongside The Stranger, he's working on ideas that'll become like Betwixt and Between, Nuptials, A Happy Death, Caligula, even the myth of Sisyphus.
Seriously, all at the same time.
Yeah, the guy was a machine. And the analysis actually points out this really interesting connection between A Happy Death and The Stranger. Some critics see it as like an earlier version exploring similar themes.
Okay, so The Stranger is in Paris. War breaks out. What happens next?
So at first it's published, but only a limited run, but it gets attention, particularly in anti-Nazi circles. And then, Sartre comes along with his essay, and that really puts Camus on the map.
Sartre the Kingmaker.
Yeah, pretty much. But then Camus has to go back to France because of his tuberculosis. And when the Allies invade North Africa, he's kind of stuck, isolated.
So the novel's out in the world, but he's back in France dealing with all this.
Right. And the analysis highlights this like weird historical contradiction. You've got this novel so rooted in pre-war Algeria being read against this backdrop of war, occupation.
Doesn't quite match up.
Yeah, it's odd. But then again, some of the themes like questioning authority, individual experience in the face of, the absurd, they resonated in occupied Paris.
Makes sense. Like, the world's gone mad, and here's this book that kind of speaks to that feeling.
Exactly. But the analysis also points out that the specific Algerian context, it often got lost. People read it more universally, like a guide for living in a world where all the old values have crumbled.
So stripped of its specific location, it became this, like, existential handbook.
Yeah, exactly. And then the myth of Sisyphus comes out, and that really cements Camus's position as this major intellectual figure.
Philosopher of the absurd.
Right. And the analysis even suggests that the language of The Stranger, the way it avoids these big abstract pronouncements, it was like an antidote to the, overblown rhetoric of the Vichy government.
Okay, so let's get into that language. Because, I mean, right from the first line, it's like, bam, you're hit with this directness, this, well, almost coldness.
Yeah, mother died today, or maybe yesterday, I don't know. It's blunt. Not your typical emotional outpouring.
Not at all. I received a telegram from the home. Your mother passed away. Funeral tomorrow. Sincerely yours. That doesn't mean anything. Perhaps it was yesterday. It's like jarring.
And one critic, the analysis mentions him, he calls that telegram the quintessence of writing. Because it tries to, impose these neat categories on this really messy human experience.
Albert passed away.
Right. It's almost sterile. And the analysis goes on to argue that written language in The Stranger, it's often used as a tool of, oppression control.
Interesting. Like, how so?
Well, they point to the letter Meursault writes for Raymond. We don't actually see the letter, but the way Camus describes it, the act of writing it, the tools, the pen, the ink, it's all emphasized.
Okay, so it's not just the words, but the whole act of writing itself.
Right. And then, of course, there's the language used in the courtroom. Super formal, manipulative.
Oh, yeah, totally. All those leading questions, the assumptions, the way they twist things.
Exactly. It's designed to, trap Meursault, not to find any actual truth. And that stands in stark contrast to Meursault's narration, which, on the surface, seems pretty straightforward, almost like everyday speech.
Yeah, it's easy to read.
But the analysis points out that it's not as simple as it seems. Meursault consistently uses the full negative n'est pas, which is actually less common in casual working class speech.
Huh. I never noticed that.
Yeah, it's subtle. And even when there is more informal language, it's not always innocent. Like when Raymond describes beating his mistress, it's full of slang, but it's used to justify violence, to maintain power.
So language, it can be a weapon, no matter how you use it.
Exactly. And you see this tension throughout the novel, the language of authority versus the language of, the people subject to that authority.
And the ultimate expression of that authority, I guess, is that whole French people bit, right?
Mm. Oh, yeah. When the judge pronounces the death sentence, it's almost comical how pompous it is. And the analysis suggests that Meursault, as the narrator, by sticking to his understated style, it's like he's subtly undermining that pomposity, getting a kind of revenge through language.
So it's not just what's said, but how it's said.
Exactly. And the analysis goes on to break down some of the other ways language works in The Stranger. Like the final chapter of part 2, you've got these moments of sharp intellectual reflection and then boom, these raw cries of rebellion.
Yeah, I remember that, like a shifting gears.
Totally. And the analysis connects that to the Arab woman's outburst when Raymond attacks her. Both are these visceral reactions, partially nonverbal. They cut through all the, BS of language.
Raw emotion.
Right.
Yeah.
The analysis even compares it to a primal scream.
And then you've got Meursault in prison, all those internal thoughts. It's described as a kind of stream of consciousness.
But we only get it filtered through his narration. We're not directly in his head, which is interesting. It highlights the limitations of, that first-person diary-like form.
We only get what he chooses to tell us.
Exactly. And then there's this idea that silence itself, it can be authentic, like Meursault's short sentences, the lack of, complex grammar. It all adds to this sense of unspoken truth.
Less is more.
Right. And Roland Barthes, the literary theorist, he famously said that the language in The Stranger, it exists as a silence.
Okay, I love that. Now, the analysis also talks about this contrast between, totality and wariness. What's that all about?
So the idea is that at key moments, especially the funeral and the murder, the writing kind of sheds its caution and you get these like super vivid sensory descriptions.
Yeah, like when they're walking to the cemetery. It's like you feel the heat, the sun beating down, the tar melting.
Exactly. And the analysis argues that these passages, they disappear in part two when Meursault's in prison on trial.
Yep.
It really underscores the shift in the novel's whole vibe.
But, okay, I have to push back a bit. Because, I mean, the sun, it's not always presented as this oppressive force, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not always straightforward.
Right. And that kind of gets to this idea of like an absence or a hollowness at the heart of the stranger. Like there's not always a neat answer, a clear explanation.
And that brings us to how, like, Sartre and Barthes, they read the novel. They were both struck by its, like, non-literary style. Short sentences, simple words, vague timelines. It's all very unadorned.
Like when Meursault's talking to the magistrate and he just lists things off. Raymond, beach, swim, coral, beach again, the little spring, the sun, and the 5 revolver shots. It's so matter of fact.
Yeah, totally. And his lawyer keeps pushing him on why he didn't cry at his mom's funeral. It's like this clash between societal expectations and Meursault's, well, lack of those expected feelings.
And then he describes the trial as feeling natural, which is like so ironic.
Right. So much irony there. And Barthes, he argued that The Stranger represents the 0 degree of writing. Super neutral, stripped down, aiming to like bypass all those literary tricks and get to this raw human experience.
Get to the core.
Yeah. But the analysis suggests it's not that simple. It argues that The Stranger doesn't completely erase those literary signs, but instead it kind of presents them as part of the system, the authority Meursault's up against.
So like even a seemingly neutral word like natural can actually be loaded with judgment.
Exactly. And they propose that The Stranger is, above all, self-aware. It's constantly drawing attention to how it's constructed.
And they point to those inconsistencies, right? Like how Meursault describes the people at the funeral differently, or that line about his mom not believing in God.
Yeah, it's like we're always reminded that there's a narrator shaping the story.
And that brings us to the big question, right? How are we as readers supposed to feel about Meursault? He's this detached narrator, this indifferent character. It's hard to know where to stand.
Totally. And the analysis brings up the whole love thing with Marie. Meursault's response to her question, it's so abstract, so distant. It's like he either doesn't get it or is deliberately rejecting that whole romantic ideal.
On his whole attitude towards marriage, sure, whatever. It's like he's either protesting or just like totally alienated.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. And then the whole thing with Raymond and his mistress, Meursault, he just doesn't intervene.
Like, where's the outrage?
Right. And Sartre, he's famously called The Stranger a novel that does not explain.
And it leaves you with this feeling of like, wait, what just happened? Why?
Exactly. The analysis actually says it ostentatiously does not explain, like it's poking fun at our need to understand everything.
Yeah, like when Raymond says, men always understand each other after that whole letter debacle.
Right.
Or when the warden acts like Meursault totally gets the penal system. It's so satirical.
It's totally calling out that need for easy answers. But Meursault, he does try to explain things sometimes, like the film with Emmanuel or the stray dogs in Algiers.
Right, but even then it's limited, right? He's observing, but not always understanding.
Yeah, there's always this distance. And that word, interesting, he uses it a lot. And it kind of highlights that he is engaged, he's thinking, but he's not making judgments. Or is he? I mean, the analysis argues that even those seemingly neutral observations, they carry weight.
So maybe there's more going on under the surface than we realize.
Maybe. And the analysis concludes that ultimately the language, the structure of The Stranger, it's all saying that art, it's not separate from life. It shouldn't try to impose this fake order, this false harmony.
Embrace the messiness.
Yeah, exactly. And Camus actually criticizes this idea of literature as like a source of salvation in his review of Sartre's Nausea. But okay, we do need to talk about how part 1 and part 2, they're kind of different beasts.
Yeah, the tone shifts.
Totally. Like the trial chapters, they offer all these interpretations of part 1, but they're all flawed, incomplete. And in part 2, we actually get more explanation from Meursault. He becomes, well, a bit less of a stranger.
He starts to understand himself, maybe.
Maybe, but the analysis asks, can we really apply this retrospective understanding to part 1? Like, does it really explain everything?
Good question. And the language of, Meursault's rebellion, it changes too. It's quiet, internal in part 1, and then in part 2 it's this like direct irony aimed at the judges.
Right. And Sartre, he saw Meursault's awareness as like pure passivity. But this analysis, it argues that his agnosticism, it's actually a form of protest. It's his way of asserting his existence.
So not giving in to their neat explanations, their judgment.
Exactly. And all that ambiguity in part one, the analysis suggests it's deliberate. It's like a shield against what they call the lyrical language of terror. There's emotional outbursts society expects.
Like when people are telling him he should have cried at his mom's funeral.
Right. He's protecting himself with his indifference, with ambiguity.
Okay, so let's talk about the mom. Because she's like this huge presence, even though she's dead for most of the book.
Yeah, her furniture's still there, her mirror, and a psychoanalytic reading could definitely see that as like this intense, maybe even like weirdly close bond he had with her.
And the analysis suggests that his coldness, his indifference, it's actually a way of dealing with death, like a defense mechanism.
It's not that he didn't care, but he just couldn't process it in a normal way.
Right. And the way her age is presented, it's all messed up, his sense of time versus like the official record. It adds to that complexity.
Totally. And then the whole coffin thing, it's so revealing. At first he's curious, but then he refuses to have it opened. It's like he's increasingly unable to face death head on.
And you've got the warden trying to make him grieve properly, the caretaker, the Arab nurse. It's also...
Yeah. And the language shifts too. All this emphasis on the color white, which seems linked to death.
And then, of course, there's the sun, this oppressive force.
Oh, yeah. Big time. And the analysis gets into the psychoanalytic interpretations. The sun is the father punishing some unspoken desire, or the sun and sea together representing the evil mother.
But they also point out that Camus himself, he doesn't give us a simple answer. It's all left open to interpretation.
Right. And then you've got the murder scene itself, the language, it's fragmented, almost dreamlike.
Yeah, it's like everything's heightened, distorted.
Totally. And the analysis brings up Gasson's Freudian reading, where the killing is the second murder, the first being the symbolic murder of the mother through burial.
Driven by guilt, love, all these tangled emotions.
Yeah. It's like this Oedipal struggle, the mother dying in his stead. But again, the analysis cautions against like taking this as the definitive explanation. There's too much ambiguity, too much left unsaid.
Right, it's not that neat. Okay, what about Marie? Because she's a pretty interesting character, especially compared to like other women in Camus' work.
Oh, totally. The analysis highlights how she's like an equal partner, and it's actually her who's interested in Meursault first. She even leaves before he wakes up after their first night together.
Wow, independent.
Right. And it's only when she wants more commitment, love, marriage, that he pushes back.
Like he's not ready for that.
Or maybe incapable of it.
Yeah.
Because the analysis argues that for Meursault, love is tied up with death because of his mom. It's like it limits his ability to connect in other ways.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then there's that whole thing with Salamano and his dog. It's like a mini version of the Meursault-mother dynamic.
Totally. Salamano, he's alienated, relying on habit, like the stoicism Meursault saw in his mom. And the dog, it's like a replacement for his dead wife and kid.
And the analysis really emphasizes the connection that text makes between the dog and Meursault's mom. Plus, the dog disappears after she dies.
Yeah, it's like Salamano's grief. It's externalizing what Meursault can't express.
So it's like a mirror reflecting back those hidden feelings.
Yeah.
But then there's also that disturbing aspect, right? The way Salamano mistreats the dog.
Yeah, that's dark. And Meursault, he doesn't really react. So the analysis asks, could that be like a subconscious approval, even a displaced hostility towards his mom?
Whoa, that's heavy.
It is. And then you throw in Raymond and his whole attitude towards women, towards Arabs. It's like adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah, they're both kind of stuck in this toxic masculinity.
And the analysis points out that Raymond's room is full of these like stereotypical masculine symbols. And when Meursault writes that letter for him, it's like the moment of least protest in the whole book.
He just goes along with it.
Yeah. And the analysis even picks up on sensory details in that scene that echo the funeral, suggesting that these episodes with Raymond Salamano, there may be like ways of acting out these unresolved feelings about his mom.
Okay, so we've talked about psychology, but the analysis also makes a strong case for reading The Stranger through a political lens.
Oh, absolutely. They argue that you can't ignore the class and race dynamics at play, especially in colonial Algeria. Like novels, they often reflect and critique the power structures they come from.
And they point to the warden and Meursault's boss as representing different aspects of power.
Right. The warden, it's this softer paternalistic authority, while the boss is more like abstract, representing the impersonal world of work.
And then you've got Celeste, the restaurant owner. He tries to be, like, heartfelt, but it always comes out kind of awkward.
Yeah, like he's trapped between these different languages, different ways of being.
Mm,
And the analysis links that to the contradictory position of the French Algerian working class.
caught in the middle.
Exactly. And then they talk about the language of the body, the physicality of Marie Emmanuelle, which aligns with the working class, versus the boss's, like, detachment. It's like ignoring the body is part of capitalist alienation.
And Raymond, with his white skin, his aggression, he stands apart from those working class figures.
Yeah, he's a different kind of outsider.
And Meursault, by hanging out with Raymond, it's like he's distancing himself from the more respectable working class and moving towards this, like, underworld figure.
And his dismissive attitude towards Celeste's sentimentality and Marie's views on marriage, it could be read as a rejection of, like, the ways the working class might try to sugarcoat their own alienation.
So maybe he's, like, calling out those self-deceptions.
Maybe. And the analysis goes even further, suggesting that this friendship with Raymond, it might be a form of, like, messed up solidarity with that anti-Arab hostility that's simmering beneath the surface.
So not just a personal connection, but something tied to those bigger tensions.
Right. And the analysis also points out how, at key moments, the characters are grouped in these very specific ways. At the coffin, it's the Parisian caretaker, the Arab nurse, and Meursault. On the beach, it's the Parisian woman, Meursault, and the Arab brother. And when Meursault is condemned, there are no Arabs present.
It's like these silent power dynamics are playing out, even in how the scenes are structured.
Totally. And the way metropolitan France is portrayed, it's not exactly flattering. Like, the warden with his Legion of Honor, the Parisian caretaker as this, like, intruder.
And the differences in funeral customs, the way the son is almost a character itself,
Mhm.
it all adds to that sense of division.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's the moment with the Arab nurse. Meursault can't meet her gaze. This lack of connection is super significant. And her knitting, it links her to the mother figure. And that white bandage, it's almost like a premonition of the violence to come.
And her tumor, right, it's a symbol of, like, impersonal cruelty.
Yeah, and it foreshadows the colonial violence. The analysis argues that her presence, it initially establishes the Arab as this disturbing other, and the whiteness associated with her triggers that unsettling white light we keep seeing.
And her silence, it's like the silence of Meursault and his mother. It's both oppression and potential resistance.
And it contrasts so sharply with the way Raymond's mistress cries out when he attacks her. It's like two different responses to violence, to oppression.
Totally. And the fact that the Arab woman is in this, like, surrogate mother role, it complicates things even more. Because now the brutality is coming from a fellow French Algerian.
Right. The analysis argues that this suggests we need to look beyond just the psychoanalytic stuff. We got to consider the political context, the tensions between French Algerians and Arabs. They even challenge Gassen's view that Meursault's strangeness is purely psychological.
So it's not just about Meursault and his personal demons. It's about this clash of identities, this struggle for power.